For nearly 50 years, a headless woman's body lay nameless on a Massachusetts beach, her hands brutally severed to hide her identity. The gruesome discovery shocked a quiet Cape Cod community in 1974. Police found expensive dental work, a blue bandana, and folded jeans beneath her crushed skull. 3 desperate exhumations failed to reveal her name. Who was the Lady of the Dunes? And who wanted her erased from existence so badly? Join us as we finally unveil the true identity of the Lady of Dunes. America's most haunting cold case. July 26, 1974, started like any summer day in Provincetown, Massachusetts. 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf walked back from the beach with her family, sand between her toes and salt air in her lungs. A local dog had followed them from the shore, tail wagging and carefree. Then the dog bolted into the dunes, barking wildly. Leslie ran after it, her young legs carrying her through the scrub pines and beach grass. What she found in that remote stretch of sand would haunt her forever and launch one of America's most baffling cold cases. Hidden among the dunes, roughly a mile from the nearest ranger station, lay the decomposing body of a woman. But this wasn't just a tragic death. Someone had turned this quiet beach into a scene of calculated horror. The woman's head had been crushed on the left side, nearly severing it completely. Her hands were gone, cut away with surgical precision. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to make sure this woman could never be identified through fingerprints or dental records. Yet, strangely, the killer had arranged the scene with disturbing care. The victim lay on her back atop a beach blanket, her head resting on a pillow made from folded jeans and a blue bandana. It was almost respectful, if one could ignore the brutality that came before. Police estimated the body had been there between 10 days and 3 weeks. In a tight-knit community like Provincetown, that meant someone had been missing for nearly a month without anyone reporting it. How was that possible? The investigation began immediately, but every lead crumbled. Bloodhounds found nothing. Missing person reports turned up empty. Local lodging records revealed no clues. Even the victim's expensive dental work, described as New York style, led nowhere despite being sent to dentists across the country. This wasn't some random act of violence. The methodical removal of identifying features screamed professional killer. Someone with experience. Someone who had done this before. As years turned into decades, the case consumed investigators. They exhumed the body in 1980, hoping new technology could reveal her identity. They tried again in 2000, then once more in 2013. Each time, hope flickered and died. The woman became known as the Lady of the Dunes, but she deserved so much more than a nickname. She had been someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister or friend. She had dreams, fears, and people who loved her. Yet for 48 years, she remained nameless in death. The case cast a shadow over Provincetown that never fully lifted. Residents couldn't shake the feeling that a killer had walked among them, someone capable of such calculated cruelty. Children grew up hearing whispered stories about the woman in the dunes. Families visiting the beach couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay buried in the sand. 3 exhumations, countless interviews, thousands of investigative hours, DNA testing, facial reconstruction. Nothing worked. Police Chief Jimmy Meads, who worked the case for decades before he died in 2011, believed only a deathbed confession could solve it. The killer's conscience would have to break before the case could close. But technology had other plans, and in 2022, nearly 50 years after Leslie Metcalf made that terrible discovery, the Lady of the Dunes finally got her name back, Ruth Marie Terry. The question then became, who wanted Ruth Marie Terry to disappear? Which of the many captivating theories solves Ruth Marie Terry's murder? Wild theories that captivated a nation. The Lady of the Dunes case had everything that captures public imagination. A beautiful victim, a brutal crime, and zero answers. When traditional detective work failed, amateur sleuths and theorists stepped in with ideas that sounded too wild to be true. The most famous theory came from an unexpected source: Joe Hill, son of horror master Stephen King. While watching the 40th anniversary screening of Steven Spielberg's Jaws, Hill noticed something chilling. About an hour into the film, an extra appeared wearing jeans and a blue bandana. The woman's face looked eerily similar to police composite sketches of the Lady of the Dunes. This wasn't just a coincidence. Jaws had been filmed on Cape Cod during the summer of 1974, the same time and place where Ruth Marie Terry met her death. The timing was haunting. The extra could have been filmed just days or weeks before the murder. Hill admitted his theory might be wrong, but he called it a compelling ghost story. When Entertainment Weekly investigated, they hit the same wall that plagued the murder case. Universal Studios had no records of the extra's identity. The casting director had died years earlier. The film's chaotic production, plagued by mechanical shark problems and budget overruns, meant documentation was scattered and incomplete. Hill's theory did something important, though. It gave Ruth a possible identity as someone who came to Cape Cod chasing dreams, maybe hoping to be part of movie magic. It made her human again, not just a victim. But Hollywood theories weren't the only ones capturing attention. A woman named Sandra Lee came forward with claims that tied the case to Boston's most notorious criminal, Whitey Bulger. Lee said her family had been close with Bulger, whom she called Uncle Jimmy. She claimed to remember seeing him in Provincetown around the time of the murder. More importantly, she believed the Lady of the Dunes killing matched Bulger's signature methods. The comparison centered on another victim, Debbie Davis. Like Ruth Marie Terry, Davis had been found near water. Her teeth had been removed to prevent identification, though her hands remained intact. Both women showed signs of strangulation. Both cases demonstrated the methodical approach of someone who kills professionally. Bulger, who was serving life sentences for 11 murders when this theory emerged, had a reputation for extreme violence and careful body disposal. He understood that teeth and fingerprints could identify victims, so he often removed them. The calculated nature of both crimes suggested someone with experience in making people disappear. Lee's claims gained attention, but they had problems. She also insisted she had discovered the Lady of the Dunes body before Leslie Metcalf, but never reported it. This detail made investigators question her credibility. Was she a legitimate witness or someone seeking attention from a famous case? The mob theory had appeal because it explained the professional nature of the crime. This wasn't a crime of passion or random violence. Someone had planned Ruth's death carefully, knowing exactly how to prevent identification. That level of calculation suggested organized crime involvement. These theories, whether Hollywood-inspired or mob-connected, kept Ruth Marie Terry's case alive in public consciousness. They generated media coverage, sparked online discussions, and kept pressure on investigators to find answers. But theories, no matter how compelling, aren't solutions. Ruth's family still waited for real answers about who killed their loved one and why. While Hollywood and mob theories captured headlines, the most heartbreaking leads came from people who seemed to know exactly what happened. But were these detailed confessions the breakthrough investigators needed, or just cruel distractions from finding Ruth's real killer? False confessions and criminal victims. Nothing tortures a family more than false hope. For decades, Ruth Marie Terry's loved ones endured a parade of supposed breakthroughs that crumbled under scrutiny. Each false lead reopened wounds and delayed real justice. The most detailed confession came from serial killer Haddon Clark, already serving 70 years for murdering 2 women. Clark told journalist Alec Wilkinson that he had killed the Lady of the Dunes while staying with his grandfather on Cape Cod in 1974. His story sounded convincing at first. Clark claimed he lured a woman into the dunes, struck her head with a surf-casting fishing rod, and then retrieved a saw from his truck. He said he removed her hands, used some fingers as fishing bait, and buried the hands elsewhere. Every detail seemed to match the crime scene. But investigators quickly spotted problems. Clark's confession included information that had been published in newspaper articles. He wasn't revealing insider knowledge. He was recycling public details. More damaging was Clark's history of false confessions. He had claimed responsibility for multiple murders that never checked out. This was his pattern: insert himself into famous cases for attention and notoriety. Clark represented a disturbing truth about high-profile cold cases. They attract confessions from people desperate for recognition, even if it means claiming responsibility for brutal crimes they never committed. These false confessions waste valuable investigative time and give families false hope for answers. Another compelling theory emerged around Rory Jean Kessinger, a career criminal with a remarkable escape story. Kessinger had robbed banks and once tried to shoot a police officer with his gun in a hospital. While awaiting trial at Plymouth County Jail, just across Cape Cod Bay from Provincetown, someone smuggled her a hacksaw blade. Kessinger used the blade to cut through her cell bars, then tied bedsheets together and rappelled out a window. A waiting car whisked her away into the night. She vanished completely, never to be seen again. The timing was perfect. Kessinger disappeared right before the Lady of the Dunes murder. When investigators created a facial reconstruction from the victim's skull in 1980, witnesses said it looked remarkably similar to Kessinger. The theory gained so much traction that authorities tracked down Kessinger's mother in the late 1990s. The mother agreed to provide a saliva sample for DNA comparison. The theory seemed so promising that investigators exhumed the Lady of the Dunes for the second time in 2000. Both initial tests failed to determine a match, leading to a third test in 2002. The final results were definitive. Rory Jean Kessinger was not the Lady of the Dunes. The career criminal had successfully vanished, but she wasn't lying dead in the Provincetown dunes. Her escape remained one of the few happy endings in this tragic story. Even psychics joined the parade of false leads. In the 1980s, a psychic told Provincetown Police Chief Jimmy Meads that the victim was a Canadian nurse named Carolyn or Marilyn O'Leary. Surprisingly, another person had also reported an American nurse named Carolyn O'Leary as missing. Investigators took the tip seriously enough to track down O'Leary. They found her very much alive, completely unaware that she had been considered a murder victim. Each false lead felt like a cruel joke to Ruth's family. They had spent decades hoping for answers, only to watch promising theories collapse one by one. The community of Provincetown also suffered, never knowing if the next confession or sighting would finally bring closure. After decades of false leads and shattered hopes, breakthrough technology finally gave Ruth Marie Terry back her name in 2022. But the shocking truth about her killer would prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who promised to love you forever. Ruth Marie Terry's identity and her killer husband. October 31st, 2022, felt like the perfect day for the FBI to announce they had finally solved one of America's most haunting mysteries. After 48 years of failed investigations, advanced DNA genealogy had accomplished what countless detectives, psychics, and amateur sleuths could not. The Lady of the Dunes had a name: Ruth Marie Terry. Ruth wasn't a Hollywood extra or a mob victim or an escaped criminal. She was a woman who had fallen in love with the wrong man. The breakthrough came through the same genealogy techniques that had solved the Golden State Killer case. Scientists compared DNA from Ruth's remains to genetic databases, slowly building a family tree that led them to her identity. But identifying Ruth was only half the victory. The other half was far more disturbing. Ruth had been married to Guy Rockwell Mauldin, and their short marriage told a story of manipulation and murder that had been hidden for nearly 5 decades. The couple had married sometime in 1973 or early 1974, during what should have been the happiest time of Ruth's life. They went on their honeymoon, travelling together as newlyweds do. But only one of them came home. When Mauldin returned from the honeymoon trip, he was driving Ruth's car. Ruth was nowhere to be found. Neighbours and acquaintances noticed this odd detail, but Mauldin had explanations ready. He told people that Ruth had died, though he kept the details vague and unsatisfying. When Ruth's brother tried to learn more about what had happened to his sister, Mauldin's story changed. Now he claimed they had fought during the honeymoon. He said Ruth had simply left him, and he never heard from her again. The inconsistent stories should have raised red flags, but this was 1974. Domestic violence wasn't taken as seriously, and women disappearing after fights with their husbands didn't always trigger extensive investigations. Mauldin moved on with his life as if Ruth had never existed. He relocated to California, settling in a small community near Salinas around 1976. He built a successful career, eventually becoming the executive vice president of a silver store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. In 1985, he retired comfortably and lived peacefully in California. The man who had brutally murdered his wife removed her hands to prevent identification and left her decomposing body in the Massachusetts dunes lived a good life for nearly 3 decades after his crime. He died of a lengthy illness on March 14, 2002, 20 years before Ruth would finally get her name back. Mauldin never faced trial. He never sat in a courtroom and heard Ruth's family describe the pain of not knowing what happened to their daughter and sister. He never had to explain why he chose such a brutal method of disposal, or why he felt entitled to erase a human being from existence. The revelation that Ruth had been killed by her husband highlighted a tragic reality about violence against women. The statistics are clear. Women are most likely to be killed by intimate partners or family members. Ruth's case wasn't unusual in that regard. What made it extraordinary was how long it took to connect her death to the man who should have protected her. On August 28, 2023, Guy Rockwell Mauldin was officially named as Ruth Marie Terry's killer, though he had been dead for over 20 years. Guy Rockwell Mauldin didn't just kill Ruth Marie Terry and disappear into the California sunset. He had been making women vanish for decades before her brutal murder. But how many other wives and girlfriends had fallen victim to this methodical monster? The monster who made women disappear. The truth about Guy Rockwell Mauldin was far more chilling than anyone had realised. Ruth Marie Terry wasn't his first victim. She was simply the last woman in a decades-long pattern of making inconvenient people disappear. Mauldin's trail of terror began in 1950, 24 years before Ruth's murder. 28-year-old truck driver Henry Lawrence. Red Bed was dating 17-year-old Barbara Jo Kelly when both of their lives intersected fatally with Mauldin. Red's body was discovered face down on a beach near Table Bluff the morning after he disappeared, shot execution style in the back of the head. He wore only socks and shoes. Near Red's body, investigators found Barbara's clothes carefully folded and tucked underneath him. But Barbara herself had vanished completely. No trace of the teenager was ever found. She simply disappeared from existence, as if she had never been born. Police suspected Mauldin from the beginning. The methodical nature of Red's killing and Barbara's disappearance matched patterns they would later see repeated. Someone had executed Red professionally and then made Barbara vanish without leaving evidence behind. 10 years later, in 1960, Mauldin struck again. His second wife, Manzanita Ryan, lived with him in Seattle along with her daughter from a previous marriage, Dolores. Both women mysteriously disappeared while living in Malden's home. This time, investigators got closer to the truth. They searched Malden's property and made a horrifying discovery in his septic tank: dismembered human body parts. The remains were clearly from murder victims, but forensic science in 1960 couldn't definitively prove they belonged to Manzanita and Dolores. Malden fled Seattle immediately after the discovery. The FBI arrested him and charged him with unlawful flight to avoid giving testimony about the deaths of his wife and stepdaughter. But King County prosecutors refused to file murder charges without being able to identify the dismembered remains. They let a serial killer slip through their fingers. The pattern was becoming clear. Malden would marry women and make them disappear when they became inconvenient. He understood how to kill without leaving evidence that could convict him in court. He was methodical, patient, and completely without conscience. After escaping prosecution in Seattle, Malden was free to continue his murderous pattern. That freedom would eventually cost Ruth Marie Terry her life in 1974. The most tragic part of Malden's story wasn't just the women he killed. It was how the system failed to stop him. Redbed's murder in 1950 should have put Malden behind bars. The dismembered remains in his septic tank in 1960 should have ended his killing spree. Instead, he walked free and continued targeting vulnerable women for another 14 years. Ruth Marie Terry paid the ultimate price for those systemic failures. She became the final victim in a pattern that had been decades in the making. On August 28, 2023, more than a year after Ruth's identification, authorities officially named Guy Rockwell Malden as her killer. The announcement connected the dots between his long history of making women disappear and Ruth's brutal death in the Provincetown dunes. Justice came too late for Ruth, Barbara, Manzanita, and Dolores, but their stories would finally be told, and their killers' decades of terror would no longer remain hidden in the shadows. How many other women might have disappeared at Guy Rockwell Malden's hands during those decades when he roamed free? And will their families ever get the closure that Ruth Marie Terry's loved ones finally received? What if modern DNA technology had existed in 1950 when Barbara Jo Kelly vanished? Or in 1960 when those dismembered remains were found in Malden's septic tank? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.